When I was around 8 or 9 years old, I was a very quiet kid who always had my nose buried in a book. My favorite stories were mysteries, and I spent most of my free time lost in those tales. While my dad tried to get me to read biographies and more educational books, I couldn't resist the excitement of solving fictional crimes and uncovering secrets. He thought reading would help me improve my mind, but I felt like I was becoming a little detective with every story. I had moved schools several times because my dad had particular ideas about education and kept looking for the perfect fit. That year, he had enrolled me in a parochial school. The school had strict rules, and we wore uniforms every day. But I liked most of my teachers, except for one, Sister Virgilius. She was the religion teacher, and she seemed ancient, with a face that looked like she was 100 years old. She was always grouchy and strict, wearing the full black habit of a nun. I didn't dislike old people. I usually loved them, but Sister Virgilius scared me. Making friends was always hard for me because I was so quiet, but I did manage to find one good friend, Brenda. We bonded over our shared love for mysteries, and together we spent a lot of time imagining ourselves as detectives. Every day at recess, the teachers would take us to a park across the street from the school because we didn't have a playground. Unlike the strict atmosphere in the classroom, we had more freedom in the park, and we were allowed to explore on our own. There was one corner of the park that fascinated us the most. It had an old white brick building that looked abandoned. All the doors and windows had been sealed up with bricks, but you could still make out the faint outlines of where they used to be. Brenda and I were obsessed with it, convinced that something mysterious was happening inside. We would walk around the building, searching for a way in, hoping to uncover some hidden secret. One day, we found a set of stairs leading down to a cellar door that wasn't bricked up. It was nailed shut, but it gave us hope that there was something important inside. The only other opening was an old mail slot near where the entrance had once been. For some reason, that slot hadn't been sealed off. We could push it open and peek inside. When we looked through, all we could see was darkness, but we could just make out the shapes of tables. There was something else too, strange clicking sounds. They didn't follow any pattern, but we heard them regularly when we pressed our ears close to the mail slot. It was too loud to be from an insect, and it sounded like it came from something alive. Brenda and I convinced ourselves that the building was hiding something, maybe something even dangerous. One fall evening, the school held an open house for parents to meet the teachers and see the students' work. The school was full of activity, with people moving between classrooms and the smell of cookies and punch filling the air. Brenda and I sneaked over to the refreshment table to grab some treats before we were supposed to. Just as I reached for a cookie, I felt a hand clamp down on mine. I looked up to see Sister Virgilius glaring at me. Her eyes were sharp and cold, and I quickly pulled my hand away and ran down the hall with Brenda. We dashed out the front door of the school and crossed the street to the park. It was the first time we had been there at night, and everything seemed different. As we caught our breath, we looked over at the old brick building. To our shock, we saw that the outlines of the windows and doors were glowing softly, like they were lit from within by some hidden light. It was eerie and mesmerizing at the same time. Despite feeling a sense of dread, Brenda and I couldn't resist the urge to investigate. We whispered to each other and decided to approach the building quietly. The clicking sounds were louder than ever, almost rhythmic, as we got closer to the mail slot. We crouched down and slowly opened it, peeking inside. What we saw made us freeze. Inside the dark room, there were several lanterns placed on the tables. The light flickered across the space, illuminating two tall, pale figures standing by one of the tables. They were incredibly thin and unnaturally long, with skin so pale it seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. They were bent over something on the table, something large covered by a sheet. The clicking noises were coming from them, like some kind of strange language or communication. Brenda and I couldn't tear our eyes away. We strained to see what was under the sheet, but it was hard to tell. It was about the size of a person, lying still. Suddenly, one of the figures bent down closer to the object on the table, and the clicking sounds grew louder and more intense. There was a sudden sharp intake of air, and for a moment, it felt like the figure was sucking something out of the thing under the sheet. Then, the object on the table began to move, struggling beneath the sheet. That was the moment when fear finally gripped us. We didn't know what we were looking at, but we knew it wasn't safe. We exchanged horrified looks, and without saying a word, we turned and ran back across the park as quietly as we could, and it felt like the pale figures might chase after us at any moment. When we got back to the school, we found a window and tried to catch our breath while keeping an eye on the building. But from that angle, it was hidden from view. Sister Virgilius found us sitting by the window and thought we were just avoiding her after the cookie incident. But after what we had just seen, she didn't seem scary at all anymore. Brenda and I never went back to that building again. We never told anyone what we saw either. Even now, it feels like something out of one of the mystery books we loved so much. I've always been drawn to the quiet shores of Canvey Island. Something about the way the waves roll in softly, carrying whispers from the deep, has always made me feel at peace. But on one strange morning, the sea revealed something it had long kept hidden. That day changed everything. I remember it clearly. The sun had barely risen. I had come down early for a walk along the beach, hoping to clear my mind. The tide had gone out, leaving behind small pools of water glistening like tiny mirrors. As I wandered closer to the shore, I noticed something unusual lying in the sand. At first, I thought it was driftwood or a tangled mess of seaweed, but as I moved closer, I saw it wasn't anything I'd seen before. The creature had reddish-brown skin, glistening in the early morning light. Its body was small, no larger than a medium-sized dog, but the details were unlike anything I had ever imagined. The skin was rough, and it looked like it had been dried by the sun, but there were still damp patches, as if it had just come out of the water. Its eyes bulged from its head, large and glassy, with an otherworldly appearance. The eyes were unlike those of a fish or a mammal. They seemed almost too big for its body, protruding in a way that made it look like it had been surprised in its final moments. But what really caught my attention were its feet, or what I assumed were feet. They were shaped like hooves, but smaller, and had tiny claws extending from them. I could almost imagine it walking, using those strange feet to grip onto rocks or the seabed. My mind raced as I stood there staring at the creature. It wasn't something from my world. The thought crept into my head that it might be an alien, something not meant for this earth. But as quickly as that thought appeared, I brushed it away. Surely, this had to be some sort of fish that had washed up, something I just didn't know about. I knelt down to get a closer look, not daring to touch it. The creature had gills along its neck, the kind you'd expect to see on a fish, but they were unlike any fish I knew. These gills seemed more like slits, angry red and slightly open as if it had been struggling for air. Its mouth, partially open, revealed sharp teeth, jagged and pointed, almost predatory in appearance. This wasn't a creature that had spent its life peacefully grazing on plants. This was something that hunted. The morning air was cool, and yet I felt a chill as I stood there. The sea lapped at the shore gently, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But there it was, a creature unlike anything I had ever seen, lying lifeless on the sand. A few years back, I had heard stories of strange creatures washing up on beaches around the world, unidentified animals that sparked rumors of sea monsters or creatures from another realm. At the time, I dismissed them as exaggerated tales, stories people told for attention or excitement. But now, standing here on Canvey Island, I wondered if those stories had more truth to them than I had imagined. Could this be the infamous Canvey Island monster I had heard whispered about? There had been stories about a strange creature washing up here once before, something similar in size and description. The locals back then didn't know what to make of it, and soon enough, the story faded into the background of daily life. But here I was, looking at another. I stood there for a long time, just staring, trying to wrap my mind around it. Some might have called it an undiscovered species, something deep from the ocean we hadn't yet identified. I remembered reading about deep-sea creatures, the kinds that lived in total darkness, where no human had ever been. Maybe this thing was one of them, pulled up by the currents and deposited here by accident. But then there were those feet. They were so strange, so unlike anything I'd seen on a fish. They seemed almost wrong. And those bulging eyes, staring into nothingness, as if they had witnessed something no one else ever would. I thought about calling someone, a marine biologist maybe, or even the local authorities, but something held me back. What if this was just another unexplained mystery of the sea, destined to remain unsolved? What if, in trying to find an answer, I ruined the wonder of it? The waves began to creep up the shore again. I knew that soon the tide would return, and the creature would be claimed by the sea once more. Part of me felt like I should stay, wait for it to happen, and watch as it was pulled back into the depths, lost forever. But another part of me wanted to walk away, leave it here as if I had never seen it. In the end, I chose the latter. I turned and walked away from the beach, my mind filled with thoughts of what I had just witnessed. I didn't look back, even though I wanted to. I didn't want to see the creature disappear beneath the waves. For weeks afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I did some research, and I found out that some people believed the Canvey Island monster was nothing more than a species of anglerfish, maybe even a frogfish that had washed up on shore. The reddish-brown skin, the large eyes, and even the strange feet all seemed to fit. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. As I traveled through South Africa, my trip took an unexpected turn. I had been looking for adventure and the chance to see some of the world's most beautiful landscapes. What I didn't expect was to get caught up in the frenzy surrounding a legendary creature, one that I had never even heard of before this trip. The Groot slang, they called it. I first heard whispers about it in a small, dusty town near the edge of the Kalahari Desert. The Groot slang was the talk of every street corner, cafe, and market stall. People spoke about it with wide eyes, half believing, half doubting. I was intrigued. The name alone was enough to spark curiosity, and the more I listened, the more fascinated I became. The Groot slang, according to the stories, was a giant serpent with the head of an elephant. A creature born from ancient myths, supposedly residing in deep, uncharted caves. Some said it guarded a treasure trove of diamonds, hidden away from the world for centuries. Others believed it was a protector of the wilderness, only appearing when nature was threatened. I shrugged off most of the tales as nothing more than folklore, but the legend kept coming up no matter where I went. From bustling city streets to quiet remote villages, everyone seemed to have a story about the Groot slang. It had become the latest sensation, especially online. My phone buzzed constantly with news reports, viral videos, and blog posts about sightings of the creature. Each story seemed more outrageous than the last. Some showed blurry images of a giant shadow slipping into the water or massive tracks leading into the depths of the wilderness. But no one had real proof. It didn't take long before I found myself getting sucked into the craze. It was kind of like being on a scavenger hunt, but with something far more mysterious, and probably non-existent, at the end. I didn't really believe in cryptids, but the whole idea was entertaining enough. I was on vacation after all, and a little thrill-seeking didn't hurt. That's when I stumbled upon a group of cryptid enthusiasts. They were an odd bunch, to say the least, all dressed in mismatched outdoor gear and armed with cameras, notebooks, and all kinds of strange equipment. They were planning an expedition to search for the Groot slang, and I thought, why not? It would make for a good story when I got back home. Besides, they seemed like fun, quirky people. The trip was bound to be an adventure, and that's what I was here for. The group met up at a small campsite not far from the supposed lair of the creature, an ancient cave that had been the subject of Groot slang lore for generations. There was an air of excitement among the group as we set out early in the morning, armed with binoculars, cameras, and a healthy dose of skepticism. The first day, we hiked through the rugged terrain, navigating rocky paths and thick brush. The landscape was breathtaking, even if the search for the Groot slang seemed futile. I found myself marveling more at the beauty of the African wilderness than at the idea of spotting a mythical creature. The mountains loomed in the distance, and the smell of the earth filled my lungs. It felt like a dream, one that had nothing to do with legends or cryptids. By the second day, some members of the group were convinced we were close to something. They pointed to strange marks in the dirt and odd rustling sounds from the underbrush. I wasn't so sure. Every rustle of leaves was probably just the wind or some small animal, and the tracks looked more like those of a large snake. Nothing unusual in a place like this. Still, the excitement was infectious. People started talking in hushed tones, as if the Groot slang might be lurking just out of sight. We spent days hiking deeper into the wilderness, moving closer to the infamous cave. At night, we would sit around the campfire, listening to the wind howl and the distant calls of animals. Some of the group would spin wild theories about the Groot slang, while others jotted down notes as if we were about to make a groundbreaking discovery. I had to admit, it was easy to get caught up in the mystery. There was something thrilling about the unknown, even if it was just for fun. By the time we reached the cave, I was exhausted but still curious. The entrance was massive, like the gaping mouth of some ancient beast. We didn't go too deep, though. Some parts were too dangerous to explore without proper gear. Still, the sight of it was impressive, and I could understand why it had inspired so many stories over the years. Of course, we didn't find any Groot slang. No one really expected to, not even the most enthusiastic believers in the group. But it wasn't a wasted trip. The experience itself was worth every moment. There was something magical about searching for a creature that might not exist, about wandering through untamed wilderness with nothing but a sense of adventure to guide you. As we made our way back to the campsite, I couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. I had come to Africa expecting to see wildlife, to experience different cultures, and maybe even find a little peace. Instead, I had found myself chasing after a creature from myth, following a group of people who were as odd as they were fascinating. And yet, it was one of the best experiences of my life. And who knows? Maybe there really was something out there, slithering through the shadows, watching us as we trekked through its territory. Maria was exploring wildlife in Olympic National Park. She was calmly taking notes on the animals and plants around her. On the day things changed, the forest became unusually quiet. The air felt different. When she turned, she saw something strange, a large figure that seemed unreal. What happened next would become a day she would never forget. Maria loved nature. She often sat for hours under the tall trees of the Ho rainforest, surrounded by green leaves and brown branches. The Olympic National Park was her favorite place to study and escape her busy life in Seattle. The park rangers knew her well. They greeted her as she walked by with her backpack full of tools, cameras, notebooks, and small instruments to measure things most people would miss. That morning, a light mist hung in the air. Maria walked slowly, letting her boots guide her through the damp path covered in leaves. She was doing a routine survey, but always gave full attention to her surroundings. The birds had been chirping since sunrise. But later in the morning, something felt off. The sounds stopped, leaving a heavy silence. Maria paused and reached for her recorder. She stood still, trying to understand what had changed. The air felt tense, and her heart began to race. Then she felt it. Not a sound or a sight, but a presence. She turned slowly, not wanting to break the moment. There it was. It looked like a human, standing on two legs, but it was not a person because it was covered in tangled hair that blended with the tree trunks. Maria's eyes grew wide. It looked like a giant, with broad shoulders and a thick mane of hair. Its face was partly hidden, but its nose was wide and its mouth stayed closed, hinting at strength. In its hand, it held a bundle of herbs, which made Maria think it wasn't just an animal. Maria couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her mind told her it couldn't be real, but there it stood, a living creature. Then, without warning, the figure disappeared into the brush, leaving almost no trace. Maria didn't hesitate. She followed. She pushed through the plants, looking for any sign of the creature. It was hard to believe something so big could vanish so quietly. There were no broken branches or tracks to show where it went. Maria went deeper into the forest. Everything around her was quiet. She felt like she was being watched, but wasn't sure by what. She didn't know why she was chasing this thing, but something inside her told her to keep going. Time passed, though she wasn't sure how much. It could have been hours or just minutes. The forest felt different, and Maria lost track of her purpose. She was no longer just a researcher. She felt like part of the forest itself. Eventually, she realized she was lost. The creature was gone, and she had no idea where she was. The only thing she had left was the feeling in her chest, the memory of what she had seen. As the light faded, Maria found the path again. The sounds of the forest returned. When she reached the end of the trail, the park rangers were waiting, worried because she had been gone longer than expected. She tried to tell them about the creature, but the words felt strange. Even she wasn't sure how to explain it. The rangers looked at her with concern, but Maria just shook her head. She knew what she had seen. Driving away from the park that evening, she glanced in her mirror, hoping to make sense of what had happened. But the forest looked normal, and she continued on her way. It was around 2 in the morning when I woke up. My room was dark, but there was a strange glow seeping through the curtains. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The light was too bright to be anything normal, and my heart started beating fast. I got out of bed, careful not to make any noise, and slowly went to the window. What I saw made me freeze. In the backyard, right behind our house, something was happening. A pale blue beam was coming down from the sky, almost like a flashlight pointed at the ground, but way bigger and brighter. My eyes followed the beam up, and that's when I saw it. A large, smooth object hanging in the air, with no sound, no wings, nothing. From the blue light, a figure was slowly descending. It wasn't human. The skin was a dull gray color, like something washed out, and its body was thin, almost too thin. Its head was bigger than it should have been, and its eyes were large, black, and shiny like marbles. I didn't know what to do. I stood there, glued to the window. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs wouldn't move. Everything felt unreal, like I wasn't supposed to be seeing this. The figure touched the ground, standing there for a moment. Then it moved, slowly and smoothly, as if floating. I knew I should wake up my parents. but something inside me kept me from doing it. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the thought that they wouldn't believe me, or worse, that I was seeing something I wasn't meant to see. The light started to fade. The figure turned back to the beam, rising up into the air. I watched as it disappeared into the object above, which then drifted up and out of sight. The sky became dark again, and the silence was heavier than before. I crawled back into bed, my mind spinning. The night had returned to normal, but nothing felt the same.